I was halfway through updating the product roadmap for Q4 when the door to my office burst open like a courtroom drama. No knock, no heads up, just brute interruption. "Logan," the voice barked. "We need to talk. Now." Standing there in a $3,000 suit and a face that had never once cracked a genuine smile was Bryce Callahan, Chief Operating Officer of FerrenTech and corporate tyrant extraordinaire. He tossed a thick folder onto my desk like evidence in a trial. I looked at the folder, then at the man I'd quietly outperformed for years. Bryce didn't sit. He loomed, always preferring to assert dominance like he was auditioning for Wall Street, the Broadway musical. "The board's restructuring," he declared, tone clipped and cold. "We're pivoting, and frankly, we need leaders who lead, not just crunch numbers in a spreadsheet." My mind blanked for half a beat. "Are you firing me?" I asked, voice flat. His smirk deepened like he was savoring the moment. "Let's not be dramatic. Your position is being eliminated, effective immediately." There was no warning, no prior review. There was no acknowledgement that my department had just driven a 38% revenue jump in under 6 months. No thanks for the late nights or for rebuilding a client pipeline from ashes. Just this cold dismissal wrapped in corporate nonsense. "You lack presence," he added, smug. "You manage systems, not people. And in this industry, charisma matters." There it was, the real reason, tucked between buzzwords and arrogance. I didn't look like the boss he pictured. I wasn't loud enough, not flashy. There is not enough alpha for Bryce's outdated mold, but I didn't flinch, not outwardly. I nodded and said, "Understood." Because what Bryce didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that I owned 90% of this company, and he'd just fired the wrong man. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I sat there in stunned silence as Bryce delivered his perfectly rehearsed execution. He didn't blink. He didn't need to. This was the highlight of his week. "HR has your severance paperwork," he added casually, as if we were discussing lunch options. "And your keycard will deactivate by 5 p.m. We'll need your laptop before then." My hands stayed flat on the desk. Steady, unmoving. I didn't give him the reaction he wanted. This wasn't just a firing, it was a purge. Bryce had been circling me for months, since the board started murmuring about performance benchmarks and cultural realignment. He wanted a clean slate, his slate. One where charisma replaced competence, where cronies replaced thinkers. I was the last threat to his narrative, the quiet force behind the company's momentum. But what Bryce didn't know, not a single person on that 22nd floor knew, was that I hadn't come into FerrenTech empty-handed. 2 weeks earlier, I had taken a call that shifted everything, a call from Nathan Cross, my late father's estate lawyer. "We need to meet," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "There's something you're entitled to, something your father left behind, but it had conditions." I remember sitting across from him in his Denver office, watching the snow melt against the windows while he slid an envelope across the table. On the front, "Do not open until your 35th birthday." I turned 35 2 days before Bryce fired me. The timing, as always, was poetic. So, while Bryce thought he was ending my career, casually tossing me to the curb like a redundant middle manager, he was opening the gate I had been waiting to walk through. Inside that envelope was a trust document that listed me as the primary beneficiary of 90% equity in FerrenTech, held in silence until the moment was right. And the moment had just arrived. He didn't demote me, he unleashed me. 2 days after Bryce tossed me out of FerrenTech like I was yesterday's analytics, I stood alone in the exact place where my father used to sit every Sunday morning, the east-facing bench at Windmere Park, our old neighborhood in Boulder. Same bench, same silence. It's the same view of the Flatirons stretching into the sky, but everything else had changed. My title was gone. My reputation? Fractured. And the company my father helped build from scratch had just shown me the door without blinking. But I wasn't there to mourn. I was there to open that envelope. The one Nathan Cross had handed me exactly 2 weeks earlier, thick parchment, sealed in wax, with one line handwritten on the front in my father's unmistakable blocky pen. "Do not open until your 35th birthday." It felt absurdly ceremonial. My father, Damian Rourke, never did anything without intention. A former aerospace engineer turned tech magnate, he was brilliant, meticulous, and dramatic. He believed in legacy, long games, and building things to last. And he thought perhaps more than anyone ever had in me. I peeled back the wax slowly, my hands shaking more than I cared to admit. Inside was a single letter and a trust deed. The letter came first. His still, steady, neat handwriting leaped off the page like he was sitting beside me. Logan, if you're reading this, you've reached the age I was when I nearly lost everything, and also the age when I finally understood what mattered. You've always walked your path, but I knew you'd come to this crossroads eventually. I couldn't stop what was coming, but I could give you a choice. So I gave you control, not because of your bloodline, because of your integrity. The enclosed trust gives you 90% of FerrenTech's voting equity. It's been held, hidden, protected until today. I blinked hard, reread it twice, 3 times. 90%. 90. Not just shares, controlling interest. No board vote is needed, no second signature, just mine. It felt surreal. I had been sitting in meetings for years, pitching ignored ideas, watching promotions bypass me, and biting my tongue while louder, flashier, less competent voices filled the room. Being the most intelligent guy in the room was enough. The results would speak for themselves. But I had misunderstood the rules of the game. It was never about merit. It was about leverage. And now, I had more of it than anyone in that glass tower ever imagined. Bryce thought he'd buried me in humiliation. He'd activated a weapon my father had built for this exact moment. That night, I met Nathan Cross again, in his firm's private conference suite downtown. A panoramic view of Denver's skyline lit the horizon behind him. "It's official," he said, sliding a notarized confirmation across the table. "You now own 90% of FerrenTech's voting power, and the best part, no one knows unless you tell them." I stared at the document. One signature, one moment, one declaration away from total control. "When you're ready," Nathan said, "you tell me, and I'll prepare everything." I nodded once. "Not yet," I said. "Let them celebrate first. Let them think I'm gone." Because when I came back, it wasn't going to be quiet. It was going to be undeniable. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was anxious, but because I was awake in a way I hadn't felt in years. Every cell in my body buzzed with clarity. For once, I wasn't reacting. I was orchestrating. By sunrise, I had reviewed the trust documents twice more, cross-referenced the voting rights clauses, and outlined my Movelin by line like a war plan. I'd spent a decade being underestimated, overlooked, and outmaneuvered. That was over. At 7:46 a.m., I called Nathan Cross. "It's time," I said. He didn't ask questions. I just said, "Understood. You'll have full execution-ready documents within 48 hours. I'll coordinate with your discretion." His voice was like a lever being pulled. Everything was in motion. That afternoon, I booked a private suite at the Solis building, the 10th floor, far from FerrenTech's downtown headquarters, but close enough to keep an eye on it. I needed a staging ground-neutral territory. No ghosts, just glass, steel, and my next move. Over the next 48 hours, I did what no one expected me to do. I disappeared. No LinkedIn posts, no dramatic statements. I didn't answer texts from colleagues whispering, "What happened?" I let the rumor mill churn. Let Bryce think he'd won. Let the board believe I was just another casualty of vision realignment. That silence was a tactic. Power moves best when unseen. Instead, I worked. I met with Nathan twice a day. We finalized the shareholder notification letter, prepped a call for a special meeting, and reviewed the bylaws down to the last comma. The more we dug, the more gaps we uncovered in Bryce's RAIN compliance issues, exec bonuses approved without board signatures, retention drop-offs disguised as natural churn. It wasn't just arrogance, it was negligence. On day 3, I met with Ivy Marsh, my late father's most trusted strategic advisor. She'd quietly retired 2 years earlier, tired of corporate theater. But she still had a mind like a scalpel, and a memory that could freeze blood. "You're going to get him, aren't you?" she asked, sipping espresso like it was nothing. "I'm going to let the numbers do it for me," I replied. She smiled and slid a folder across the table. Inside, a decade's worth of departmental reports, employee exit interviews, and red flags ignored. "Use it wisely," she said, "and remember, you're not just fighting a man, you're reviving a legacy." By the end of the week, everything was in place, legally, strategically, emotionally. Bryce had no idea that the countdown had already begun, and I wasn't coming back to reclaim my job. I was coming back to reclaim the company. I waited 1 whole week. Not because I had to, but because I wanted Bryce Callahan to get comfortable on the throne, he thought he'd claimed. Let him puff up his chest, play king behind that walnut desk, hold court with his yes men, and boast about tightening operations while spinning my firing as a strategic pivot. Let him believe his power was permanent. The thing about egos like Bryce's is they collapse hardest when they're sure they've won. On Monday morning, 7 days after he shoved me out of FerrenTech, I picked out my suit, dark charcoal, hand-pressed. No tie, I wanted clean lines, not submission. A crisp pocket square, monogrammed silver cufflinks, and leather Oxfords polished to a mirror shine. I wasn't dressing for revenge. I was dressing for resurrection. I stepped out of my apartment just after 8 a.m. Denver was coming alive, streetcars humming, commuters clutching coffee, and blue sky stretched tight across the skyline. The world had no idea it was about to witness a power shift. At 8:47 a.m., I arrived at the FerrenTech building. The lobby receptionist, Jamie, mid-20s, used to greet me with Mr. Rourke, and a warm smile did a double take when I stepped inside. She rose halfway from her chair. Mr. Rourke, I thought... I smiled gently. Just Logan, always was. She hesitated, unsure whether to buzz security or offer me coffee. I didn't wait. I walked straight to the executive elevators and tapped the override code, which was still tied to my shareholder credentials. The doors opened with a familiar ding, smooth, unbothered. On the top floor, the air felt different, thicker. It is the kind of atmosphere you think of before a storm. Nathan Cross was waiting outside the boardroom, a sleek folder in hand. His expression was unreadable calm, yet aware we were moments away from detonating a carefully engineered shift in power. "They're in there," he said quietly. "Quarterly performance review. Bryce started 5 minutes ago. He's in full peacock mode." "Perfect," I replied, adjusting my cuffs. "Let him finish his opening act." We waited 30 more seconds. Then I nodded. Nathan opened the door. The room fell silent. 12 heads turned. Conversations stalled mid-sentence, and at the far end of the long glass table stood Bryce Blazer, unbuttoned, mouth slightly open, brow furrowing in real-time disbelief. "Logan?" he said, blinking like I was a ghost. I stepped inside calmly, placing the folder on the polished oak surface. "Good morning, Bryce." "Directors?" "Excuse me," Bryce snapped, voice already rising. "This meeting is closed to former employees." "Then it's a good thing I'm not here as a former employee," I said, locking eyes with him. "I'm here as FerrenTech's majority shareholder." Gasps. Literal gasps. Every board member glanced between me, the folder, and one another. Mr. Halbrook, FerrenTech's longest-sitting director, adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. "Is this accurate?" Nathan calmly slid a notarized certificate across the table. "The Rourke Family Trust, established and protected under sealed provisions, grants Mr. Logan Rourke 90% of the company's voting shares, effective on his 35th birthday. All documentation is filed and binding." Bryce laughed. Not a real laugh, the forced, nervous kind of people make when their world is about to implode. "You've got to be kidding me." "Not remotely," I said. "And don't worry, this isn't a surprise ambush. You see, this meeting was scheduled correctly. There's just one item that's been added to the agenda. Special shareholder review of executive leadership." Halbrook raised an eyebrow. "Specifically?" "Specifically," I said, sliding a second document forward. "A motion to remove Bryce Callahan as Chief Executive Officer." Bryce lost it. "You can't just walk in here and throw motions around like this is some family dinner." "No," I said coolly. "But you don't have to throw anything when you own 90% of the vote. You submit, and it stands." The room was still. Bryce looked smaller by the second. His bravado thinned out like air in a collapsing balloon. He tried to laugh again, but it caught in his throat this time. "You've planned this all along," he said, voice barely a whisper. "No," I said. "You planned it for me. You activated everything my father put in place the moment you fired me." There it was. The turning point. Not dramatic, just undeniable. This wasn't vengeance. It was a correction. The silence in the room stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Bryce stood at the far end of the table, eyes darting from face to face, hoping someone would speak up in his defense. But no one did. They were all staring at the ownership documents now laid out before them. Neat, official, notarized, ironclad. "You can't do this," Bryce said. His voice cracked, thinner than I'd ever heard. This is a hostile takeover." "No," I said calmly. "It's a correction, and you started it." He stepped forward, jabbing a finger toward me. "You've never led a company, Logan. You were a spreadsheet guy, an ops analyst. You don't know what it means to carry weight." I didn't flinch. And yet I carried this company through 3 product launches while you were busy approving first-class travel budgets for team synergy. Do you want to talk about weight? Let's talk performance. I opened the folder Nathan had prepped and slid a packet of reports across the table. You all deserve to see what's been happening beneath the surface. Declining employee retention. Project delays have been hidden by reporting tweaks. Rising customer churn, camouflaged by inflated acquisition numbers. HR flagged 4 harassment complaints against senior managers. 3 were never escalated. Gasps flickered around the room again. Seated in the back with folded arms, Ivy Marsh gave a subtle nod. And these, I said, tapping another stack, are exit interviews. These are real words from real people who left because the culture here became toxic, hostile, and performative. Most of them cite executive behavior as the core reason. Bryce let out a hollow laugh. So now you're parading around paperwork? You think data replaces leadership? No, I said, but it exposes the lack of it. I turned toward the board. Let's not pretend this is about me. This is about stewardship, about accountability. Bryce has been ruled by intimidation, noise, and charisma without character. And it's cost us. Halbrook leaned in. Are you formally submitting a motion? I am, I replied. Effective immediately. I submit a motion to remove Bryce Callahan as CEO and appoint interim executive leadership until a permanent selection is made. There was a pause, a long one. Bryce straightened his back. You don't even have the votes. I looked him dead in the eye. I don't need them. I hold 90% of the voting power. The motion carries with or without consensus. The general counsel, silent until now, cleared his throat. According to corporate bylaws, Mr. Rourke's majority ownership satisfies the requirement for an immediate executive decision. Bryce's face flushed crimson. This is a vendetta. No, I said quietly. This is math. He slammed a hand against the table. You're making a mistake. Maybe, I said, but at least it'll be my mistake, not inherited from your ego. Security wasn't needed. Bryce didn't lash out. I didn't beg. But as he packed up his laptop and straightened his blazer with trembling hands, you could see when he realized the truth. The performance was over. The illusion had shattered. And the man who once strutted through these halls as he owned them was now just another nameplate being removed. When the door clicked shut behind him, I didn't speak right away. The room needed a moment. We all did. Then I looked around. This company has been running on borrowed time, but it doesn't have to anymore. I took a breath. We have good people here, talented people. People who've been buried under bureaucracy and office politics. Starting today, that ends. We rebuild not just numbers, but trust, culture, and purpose. If you're with me, let's get to work. Slowly, the heads around the table began to no-done by one. Halbrook leaned back, a rare smile forming. Well then, Mr. Rourke, welcome back. I exhaled, not with triumph, but with clarity. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. And for the first time in years, FerrenTech finally belonged to someone who gave a damn. I didn't move into the CEO's office immediately. There was no need to claim the corner suite or drape my name across a door like a trophy. Power had already been established, and I had no interest in playing the same performance Bryce had, perfected louder titles, bigger desks, empty gestures. My first act wasn't to decorate a space. It was to listen. The next morning, after the boardroom shift, I called for a company-wide meeting. Not the kind with catered breakfast and staged applause. I booked the main auditorium and had the tech team send out a single message. All hands, 10 a.m. No slides, no script. They came slowly, cautiously. You could feel it in the room. Uncertainty buzzed like static. The front rows were empty, and the back rows were complete. Some people whispered. Some avoided eye contact. They'd seen leaders come and go, promises made and broken. I wasn't just a new chapter to them. I was a question mark. I stood at the front of the room alone. No notes, no teleprompter, just the truth. I know most of you weren't expecting to see me again, I said. Frankly, I wasn't expecting to be here either. But here we are. I let the silence breathe. A week ago, I was fired by a system that had forgotten how to see people. I was told I didn't have a leadership presence, that I wasn't what the company needed. And I didn't argue. Not then. A few chuckles rose, hesitant but real. But I've spent the last few years watching too many of you get passed over and talked over, burned out. I've seen late nights unrewarded, innovation buried under bureaucracy, and meetings that felt more like performances than progress. Heads nodded now, arms unfolded. You could feel the air shift. That ends now. I didn't promise miracles. I vowed to change. And change started with conversations. Over the next 3 weeks, I met with engineers, project managers, interns, front desk staff, and janitorial crews. I sat in break rooms and listened. I walked factory floors and took notes. I asked the same 3 questions every time. What's broken? What do you need? Who's been overlooked? And the answers came, quietly at first, then louder. It wasn't about perks. It was about trust, about people wanting to feel seen, respected, valued not, micromanaged, silenced, or sidelined. So, I acted. I reinstated budgets for professional development that Bryce had cut. I launched a new People First program, an internal initiative designed to reward collaboration, elevate new ideas, and promote equity across departments, not just with emails and slogans, but with measurable action. I promoted Clara Voss, an HR specialist who had been silenced too long, to head of people strategy. She was the one who flagged misconduct reports that no one took seriously. Now she had the authority to ensure none of them gathered dust again. I brought back Sanjay Rao, a brilliant engineer who had resigned after being passed up for promotion 3 times, despite leading the AI backend for our flagship product. This time he returned as Director of Product Intelligence, with a real budget and a seat at the table. I quietly let go of 6 middle managers, people who had led through intimidation, favoritism, or sheer apathino email blasts. No drama, just clean breaks. And then, I turned to the culture. One Friday afternoon, I walked through the halls with a coffee, and I noticed something that nearly stopped me in my tracks. Laughter. Real laughter. In the design bullpen, someone had taped up sketches with handwritten feedback, collaboration, not control. The break room had homemade cupcakes again. People lingered not out of fear of being seen as uncommitted, but because they wanted to talk, connect, and belong. We weren't just fixing a company. We were healing it. I finally entered the CEO's office at the end of the 3rd week. Not because I needed it, but because it was time. The space hadn't changed much. It's still the same view of the skyline. It's still the same walnut desk. But I replaced the old framed motivational quotes with something new. Photos of our people. Real moments. Product launches, team hikes, handwritten thank you notes from customers. On the far wall, one image hung larger than the rest. 15 years ago, my father and I cut the ribbon on our first office. I stood in front of it for a while. I hope I'm doing it justice, I whispered. Then I turned and opened my laptop. 2 numbers were in. Revenue was up. More importantly, employee retention climbed by 26%. Internal promotion rates doubled. Anonymous feedback was overwhelmingly positive. For the first time in years, people weren't whispering, they were speaking up. At noon, Clara buzzed me. Hey, you ready? The department leads are waiting in the main hall. I stood, straightened my collar, and headed out. Because we weren't done. We were just getting started. 1 year ago, I walked out of FerrenTech with nothing but a cardboard box and a polite smile, dismissed, disregarded, and replaced. Today, I walk those same halls not to prove anything to anyone, but to protect what matters. This journey wasn't about revenge. It was about remembering who I was before the system tried to tell me I wasn't enough. It was about reclaiming value, not just mine, but everyone who had been overlooked, unheard, or undervalued because they didn't fit someone else's mold. I've learned that power doesn't always look like the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes, it's the person who listens when no one else does. Leadership isn't granted by title. It's earned by consistency, integrity, and the courage to stand alone when necessary. If you've ever been passed over, let go of, or made to feel invisible, you are not powerless. You are not done. You are being redirected. Hold your ground, gather your truth, and when the time comes, walk back in, not for vengeance, but for vision. Because the most powerful thing you can do after someone underestimates you is to succeed without needing to say, I told you so. Let your growth speak louder than your anger. Let your work be the echo they can't silence. And above all, remember, the story isn't over when they close the door. It's only over when you decide it is. And mine? Mine was just getting started.